You must understand the consequences of your actions.
I can't do this.
This anymore.
Spread your legs. I won't stop until my heir is in your womb. The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. Don Matteo De Luca spoke them in a voice colder than marble, and it made Ava Bennett's spine lock and her hands tremble. She was 20, dressed in white lace and tears, standing across from a man who could have been her father or her executioner. She didn't scream when she first saw him, didn't scream at his sharp suits, the way silence followed him like a shadow, or how the guards around him never blinked. She told herself he was just a tired, lonely man with power. Old, demanding, someone she could survive. She didn't scream when the villa doors closed behind her, didn't scream when her father kissed her forehead and walked away like she wasn't even his daughter anymore. But when Matteo De Luca tilted her chin with 2 fingers, looked into her eyes, and promised to claim her womb as his legacy, Ava's world shattered quietly. That was the moment everything changed. That was when Ava realized she wasn't a guest in this empire. She was the offering, and Matteo De Luca never releases what he owns. Welcome, lovers of dangerous men and forbidden love. If stories about slow-burn obsession and women who rise from captivity make your heart race, support me by subscribing. Help me reach 500 subscribers and dive into Ava and Matteo's story. We begin in Rome, where debts are paid in blood, and marriage is the contract no one escapes. The Rome air was different, not just in scent, though it smelled like money and something old, something built before her country even existed, but in pressure. It wrapped around Ava like a velvet noose. She stood in the arrivals terminal, her cheap suitcase bumping against her leg, the wheels crooked from being dragged across too many dorm hallways. Her black dress clung to her in the warm air, too formal for travel, too plain for what she feared was coming. Her father hadn't spoken much on the flight. He barely looked at her now, eyes flicking to his phone every few seconds, thumbs tapping anxiously, sweat blooming at his collar. He looked like a man walking to his own execution, but Ava already knew he wasn't the one being offered up. A black car slid to the curb. Its windows were mirror dark, its doors opening not like a welcome, but like an order. The driver stepped out, sharp suit, darker eyes. No words, just a nod. Her father grabbed her arm, fingers digging into her skin. "Please, just don't make a scene," he whispered. That was all the explanation he gave her, before pushing her into the back seat. Ava sat stiffly, feeling the cold leather beneath her thighs, her heart pounding in sync with the city blurring past the tinted windows. Rome passed like a dream she wasn't allowed to touch. Cobbled streets, ancient ruins tucked behind storefronts, fountains older than anything in her textbooks. It should have felt romantic. It didn't, as the car turned down a private drive lined with cypress trees. Ava's unease bloomed into something physical. Security cameras, tall walls, broken glass on top of stone. The villa that emerged was sprawling and elegant, too perfect, like a museum where nothing was ever allowed to change. The driver didn't say a word as he opened her door. Her father didn't say one as he led her inside. The villa smelled like leather, wine, and control. Men in suits lingered in corners, eyes tracking every movement. Ava's skin prickled with the kind of awareness that wasn't just fear. It was the certainty that nothing she did here would go unnoticed. They were ushered into a sitting room so large it made her college dorm seem like a shoebox. Renaissance art lined the walls, marble floors gleamed, and in the center, seated like he belonged on a throne, was Don Matteo De Luca. He didn't rise, didn't speak, just watched her. He was younger than she expected, not old like the rumors had whispered, but older enough to make her feel like a child. 50, maybe. His salt and pepper hair was slicked back with precision, his 3-piece suit molded to his tall frame like armor. His hands were bare, but Ava noticed the thick veins, the old scar along one knuckle. When her father actually bowed, Ava froze. This was real. This was him. "Mr. De Luca," her father stammered. "Thank you for seeing us. Matteo raised a hand. Silence fell like a command. Then his eyes shifted to Ava. That was when she knew what she was here for. The way he looked at her wasn't hungry or lecherous. It was worse. It was assessing, as if she were something to be measured, weighed, and signed for. "Ava," he said at last, just her name, in a deep, unhurried voice that rolled like smoke across a polished table. She didn't answer. Matteo's gaze didn't waver. "Come closer." Her legs moved before her mind could decide. She stepped forward until she was standing just a few feet from him. Her pulse was in her throat. "You're taller than I expected," he said. "That's good. Strength will serve you." She opened her mouth, maybe to protest, maybe to run, but the way he said it made her chest tighten. "Matteo, please," her father began again. "She doesn't understand. I told her, I just need more time. Time is a currency you no longer possess," Matteo said, his voice still low, still calm. 3 years, interest, you signed, you begged, you failed. His eyes never left Ava. "And now," he continued, "you offer her, your daughter, in place of money. In place of your honor, Ava turned, horrified, to her father, but he wouldn't meet her eyes. She'll be safe, he said. He promised you'll be safe, Ava, that you'll be treated well, that you sold me, she whispered. A sharp inhale was the only sound. Her voice broke the air more than any shout could have. Matteo stood, and now he was a threat, tall, broad, not loud, never loud, but dangerous in the kind of way that made Ava's survival instincts scream. He moved to her slowly, like a man with all the time in the world. You will marry me, he said, his hand brushing lightly under her chin, tilting her face to his. Your father's debt will vanish, and in return, you will give me what I require. She flinched. Which is? His eyes darkened. An heir. The word felt like a sentence. You don't get to demand that, she hissed, voice trembling. Matteo leaned in, his breath brushing her ear. I do, he said softly, because I own your father, and now I own you. He stepped back. There will be a ceremony. 3 days. You will wear the dress we choose. You will smile, and when the night comes, you will spread your legs for me like the bride you are. I will only stop when my heir is inside you. Ava's breath left her in a rush, her cheeks burning with shame and rage and disbelief. Matteo watched her like a man watching a storm build, with admiration and patience. I suggest, he said, you come to terms with your new life, quickly. And just like that, he turned his back to her. The guards were already moving to escort her upstairs. Behind her, her father whispered a broken apology, but Ava didn't look at him, because she knew now she wasn't here to be a wife. She was here to be claimed. The dress wasn't white. It was bone, deliberate, clean, but not innocent. It fit her perfectly, which meant someone had taken her measurements without her knowing. That chilled Ava more than the marble floors beneath her bare feet. The villa chapel was small, but grand in the way old money always was. Candlelight flickered against carved angels that didn't look like they were watching over her, more like they were witnessing a sin and wouldn't intervene. There were no guests, no music, just a priest who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, and 2 guards near the doors who never looked directly at her. Her father was gone, disappeared into some quiet corner of Rome the moment she agreed to the marriage. She'd asked Matteo where he was. His answer, irrelevant. The priest mumbled in Italian. Ava understood none of it, just the cadence of ritual, the weight of finality. Matteo stood beside her, tall and still, not once looking at her. His presence was a wall. His suit was black, his tie darker, his expression unreadable. When the time came to say, I do, he spoke without hesitation. When it was her turn, Ava hesitated. The priest paused. Matteo didn't move, but she felt the chill emanating from his silence. She swallowed the taste of bile and nodded. I do. He slipped a ring on her finger. It was heavy, not just in weight, but in meaning. It gleamed like it belonged to someone else, someone who had chosen this. The kiss wasn't romantic, just pressure, a claim. Then it was done. Ava Bennett was now Ava di Luca, not a wife, not a bride, a contract. She expected Matteo to say something. He didn't. He simply extended his arm, waiting for her to take it. She didn't want to, but she did. He led her through the villa like a man walking a piece of art he'd just acquired. The guards bowed as they passed. Servants stepped aside. Every hallway was polished, every corridor quiet. The silence screamed. He stopped outside a door. Dark wood, thick, old. He opened it without ceremony. This is our room. Ava stepped inside. The air was warm, clean. It smelled like cedar and expensive cologne. The room was massive, vaulted ceilings, silk curtains, a bed that could swallow her whole. She turned to him. Are you going to? No, he said. Not tonight. Relief swelled, but so did confusion. You said? I said I would only stop when my heir is in your womb, he replied, walking past her into the room. I didn't say it would happen today. He unbuttoned his jacket, placed it over the chair. Methodical, controlled. Everything he did felt like precision crafted in violence. I'm not a monster, he said without looking at her. You're not human either, she snapped. Matteo smiled faintly, but there was no humor in it. You're angry. That's good. I'd be disappointed if you weren't. He glanced at her finally. You may sleep wherever you like. The door locks from my side, not yours. He walked to the sitting room attached to the bedroom and closed the door behind him. Ava stood frozen. She didn't move for a long time. Eventually, she chose the side of the bed farthest from the door. She didn't take off the dress. She curled beneath the covers and stared at the ceiling. She didn't cry. She couldn't. Tears would mean she still believed this was temporary, that someone would come for her. No one was coming. The next morning, she woke to a silver tray on a cart beside her. Fresh fruit, eggs, black coffee, a note folded neatly on the napkin. You begin language lessons today, noon. Be ready. No signature, no choice. She ate in silence, her fingers trembling with every bite. This wasn't a honeymoon, it was indoctrination. By midday, a woman named Elena arrived, graceful, older, with eyes that didn't pity but didn't judge either. She introduced herself in Italian and then again in English. "I will teach you. You will learn. There are no excuses in this house." She didn't smile once. That evening, Ava didn't see Matteo. The next day followed the same rhythm: food, instruction, isolation. On the third night, she stood in front of the massive mirror in the corner of the bedroom, staring at her reflection. She barely recognized herself. The hard lines of her jaw, the hollow behind her eyes. Matteo entered the room as silently as a shadow. She turned. He didn't approach her, just watched. "You're adapting," he said. "You're enjoying that?" "No," he said. "I respect it." She wanted to scream at him, to break something, to claw the ring from her finger and throw it in his face. But she didn't, because a deeper part of her knew he wouldn't react. He wasn't made to react. He was made to endure. And now, so was she. When he left again without a word, Ava crawled into bed fully clothed, her hands wrapped around the edge of the sheets like lifelines. This was her life now, not a cage of chains, a cage of choices she never got to make. The window was beautiful, arched glass, framed by sheer curtains that swayed with the breeze of an open world Ava wasn't allowed to touch. She pressed her palm to the pane, cold, thick, reinforced. Of course it was. She tried the handle again, not because she thought it would suddenly give, but because hope is stupid like that. It rattled uselessly, the sound small in the echo of the oversized bedroom. Down in the garden, two men in suits walked the perimeter with the same rhythm every hour. She'd started timing them. The gates never opened. No delivery trucks. No staff leaving. Everyone who worked here lived here, like a cult or a prison, or both. The villa was gold-veined marble, velvet drapes, rooms that smelled like money and power. It looked like freedom, until you tried to breathe too deep. Every door was locked. Every hallway she explored ended with another quiet nod from a guard standing still as a statue. Her cage didn't have bars. It had imported chandeliers and security systems no one ever mentioned. Teresa, the head of household staff, was the only one who offered something close to warmth. A woman in her 50s, sharp and maternal in a way that didn't pretend things were fine. "Stop rattling the windows, ragazza," she said one morning as Ava stared out into the sun-drenched courtyard. "You'll only frustrate yourself." Ava didn't respond. Teresa sighed and placed a tray of fresh pastries on the table. "You think the cage feels less like a cage because it's made of gold, but it still locks from the outside." Later that night, Ava found Matteo in the library. He was seated behind a massive desk, sleeves rolled up, reading something in Italian. He didn't look up when she entered. She stood there a full minute before speaking. "I want to leave." "I know," he said simply, turning a page. She stepped closer, pulse ticking with fury. "You said I'd be safe. You didn't say you'd lock me in a castle like a fairy tale hostage." Matteo finally raised his eyes. "You're not a hostage, Ava. You're my wife." She laughed, bitter and sharp. "That's what you're calling it?" He closed the book, leaned back in his chair. "You agreed to save my father?" she snapped. "Not because I wanted to be bred like a mare in a stable?" His face didn't move, not a twitch. "Careful," she stepped closer. "Or what? You'll finally raise your voice? Hurt me? Break your precious calm?" "No," Matteo said, standing. "I don't need to hurt what I already own." Ava flinched, not from fear, but rage. He moved around the desk, towered in front of her, close enough to feel the heat of him. His presence was overwhelming, like a wall of heat in a freezing room. "I will say this once," he said, voice low, controlled. "You are here for one reason, to carry my name and to carry my blood." Her hands curled into fists. "You're insane. I'm necessary." She stared at him, chest rising and falling with the force of her breathing. "You can't force me." "I won't have to." Silence stretched between them, thick and dangerous. Ava broke it first. "You'll never get what you want from me." He stepped even closer, his hand lifting, not in threat, but to brush a strand of hair from her cheek. She didn't flinch. She didn't move at all. "You say that now," he said, gaze lingering on her mouth, "but you'll come to me, eventually." "Go to hell." Matteo smiled then, small and cold. "I already live there," he whispered. "You're just joining me." That night she ripped the sheets off the bed and dragged them into the sitting room, slept on the couch with the lights on, too angry to care how cold the floor felt against her feet. In the morning, a new note sat on her breakfast tray. "Your first self-defense session is today, noon. Wear comfortable clothes." Ava stared at it, then tore it in half. Later she showed up anyway, because if she was going to be caged, she'd damn well learn how to fight. The war had started. The first word Elena taught her was silencio. Not hello, not please, not thank you. Silencio. Ava thought it was ironic, considering silence was the only thing this place was good at. Silent guards, silent halls, silent judgment. But Elena, poised and stern with perfectly arched brows, explained the word like it was a weapon. "In this house, you must know when to speak and when not to," she said. "Power listens before it talks." Ava didn't argue. She just nodded, even though her stomach clenched every time she had to sit in a room and be taught how to blend into a world that had stolen her. Italian came slowly. Ava tripped over verbs and cursed under her breath when Eleanor corrected her pronunciation, but the corrections didn't sting as much as they should have. Ava wasn't learning for the sake of politeness. She was learning because she needed to understand what the hell people were saying when they thought she didn't. Survival, she reminded herself, not surrender. 3 days into lessons, Ava understood enough to catch Matteo speaking in low tones with one of his men outside the study. "She's stubborn, but smart," the man responded with a quiet chuckle. "Just your type." Matteo said nothing else, just walked away. That was the first time Ava realized he was watching. Not constantly, not obviously, but always near enough to see what she was becoming. Her body hurt before she even saw Ricardo. He was ex-military, sharp-jawed, all muscle, and no bullshit. Ava met him in the underground gym of the villa, and he didn't bother introducing himself, just tossed her a pair of gloves and said, "Hit me." She blinked. "Excuse me." I said, "Hit me." He raised a padded hand. "You're here to learn, so stop blinking and start swinging." The first punch was embarrassing. The second, weaker. By the third, Ava's palms were slick with sweat, and her breath was short. Ricardo didn't pity her. He didn't yell either. He just adjusted her stance, showed her where to put her weight, made her throw the punch again. And again, and again. By the end of the first hour, her knuckles were bruised, her arms sore, and her pride cracked in 3 places. But she walked out of the gym with her chin lifted. Matteo was in the hall when she returned, leaning against the banister, suit jacket off, tie loosened, watching. Ava didn't speak. She walked past him like he wasn't there, but she saw the flicker in his eyes, not approval exactly. Something quieter, more dangerous, recognition. By the second week, Ava could carry a basic conversation in Italian. She no longer smiled at the staff, and they no longer smiled back. There was no warmth in the villa, only respect, the kind you earned by surviving. She started waking up earlier, training longer. Ricardo made her run drills until her legs burned. He taught her how to break a hold, where to strike, how to breathe through panic. "Don't look away," he said once when she flinched at a feint. "If someone's going to hurt you, you need to see it coming." That night she stared at herself in the mirror and practiced saying no in 5 different tones: soft, cold, loud, broken, final. Matteo didn't interfere. He didn't praise, but she could feel it, in the silence between them, in the way his eyes lingered a little longer when they passed in the hallway, in the glass of wine that began appearing next to her dinner tray, though she never asked for it. Once, in the gym, she caught him watching her through the window. Ricardo didn't stop the session. He didn't even glance toward the glass. But Ava's punches came faster after that. This wasn't about pleasing Matteo. It was about taking something back. Every word she learned, every bruise she earned, every moment she stared down the guards and refused to lower her gaze. It added weight to the woman she was becoming. She wasn't free, not yet, but she wasn't fragile either, and that was something. The dress was green, dark, like the bottle of wine Matteo drank every evening. Velvet, soft as breath, and heavier than guilt. It hugged her in ways that made Ava uncomfortable, elegant, exposed, deliberate. Teresa zipped it up without comment, but her eyes lingered on Ava's reflection, thoughtful. "He wants them to see you," she said quietly. "Not just know you, exist, but see you." Ava didn't respond. She didn't need to. They both understood what this was. Not an invitation, a debut. The car ride was silent. Matteo beside her, suited in black, cufflinks like tiny weapons. He didn't touch her, didn't speak, just glanced once at her legs, crossed carefully, and then back out the window. The palazzo glowed with gold and candlelight. Men in tuxedos, women in silk. Ava stepped into the ballroom with her chin lifted, every muscle in her body coiled tight. She felt the stares, the whispers. Too young, too foreign, too replaceable. Matteo's hand landed on the small of her back, light but firm, a possession disguised as poise. "She is my wife," he told a cluster of men as they approached. "You will show her the respect her name demands." The men nodded. Some smiled too wide, others didn't bother pretending. Ava smiled back with her teeth. She said little, spoke only when spoken to, answered in clear Italian that left no doubt she'd been preparing for this moment. And then he appeared, the one whose name she'd heard in quiet mutterings between guards and servants. Luciano Bianchi, younger than Matteo, sharper in the face, handsome in the way women hated themselves for noticing. He smiled, like he was already undressing her with his eyes. "So, this is the American," he said, taking Ava's hand before she offered it. "She has a name," Matteo said flatly. Ava withdrew her hand slowly. Luciano grinned. "Of course, Ava, right? Tell me, Ava. "Do you speak Italian? Or just scream in English when the Don visits your bed?" Silence dropped over the group like a guillotine. Matteo's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. He didn't need to, because Ava stepped forward, just a breath, looked Luciano in the eye, and smiled. "I scream in Latin," she said sweetly, voice as calm as glass. "It's the only language men like you understand." The man beside Luciano choked on his drink. One woman snorted before covering her mouth. Luciano blinked. Matteo laughed. Not a smirk, not a breathy exhale. A real, sharp laugh that sliced through the tension and left the room buzzing. Luciano's face reddened, but Matteo clapped him on the shoulder. "I told you, she's not a doll." Then he turned to Ava, his expression unreadable. "Come." He led her away, hand still on her back, his grip warmer now, different. He didn't speak again until they were alone on the balcony, the music drifting faint behind them. "You could have stayed silent," he said. "I don't know how." He looked at her for a long moment, then reached into his jacket and handed her a glass of champagne. "To wives who bite," he said. She didn't toast him, but she drank, and for the first time since arriving in Rome, Ava felt like she'd stolen something back. The villa was quiet, but something in the air had shifted. Not loud, not obvious, just changed, like a thread had been pulled loose, and the fabric was beginning to unravel. Ava felt it that night when she passed Matteo in the hallway. She'd just returned from training, sweat at her spine, knuckles bruised from Riccardo's drills. Her hair was pulled back in a messy twist, her tank top clinging, her breath uneven. She almost didn't see him there, leaning against the wall near the library door, a glass of something amber in his hand. He didn't say her name, just looked, the kind of look that didn't command, didn't threaten, didn't need to. She paused. "You watching me now?" she asked, voice dry. Matteo tilted his head. "I've always watched you." Her mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "Of course you have. You own me, remember?" "I remember everything," he said, "especially what I've claimed." She should have walked away, should have left him in that corridor with his suit and his silence and his shadows. But her feet didn't move. Instead, she stepped closer. "You think I'm impressed by control?" she whispered. "That your quiet makes you noble?" "No," he said. "I think it makes me dangerous." The glass in his hand caught the light as he set it on a table beside him. Then, slow, deliberate, he reached out. Not fast, not aggressive, just a touch. His fingers brushed her jaw, a feather light grazed down to her neck, then stopped, waiting. His eyes searched hers, not with hunger, but with something worse. Permission. Ava should have slapped him, should have turned her face away, thrown his words back at him, reminded him he was the man who bought her like a suit tailored to fit his needs. But she didn't move, didn't speak. Her breath hitched when his thumb brushed her cheekbone. And then, impossibly, she leaned forward. The kiss came like gravity, silent and inevitable. His lips were warm, gentle, nothing like the man she knew. No demands, no claim, no pressure, just waiting. Ava didn't know who kissed deeper first. Maybe him, maybe her. It didn't matter. All she knew was that her hands had found the lapels of his jacket, and his palm was pressed to the curve of her waist and her body. Traitorous, hungry, leaned into the heat of him like it had always belonged there. When she pulled back, her chest was rising and falling like she'd run a mile. Matteo's eyes were darker than she'd ever seen them. She whispered the words before she could stop them. "I hate you." He nodded once. "I know." And still, he didn't reach for her again, didn't chase, just let the silence stretch between them. And Ava, furious and confused and aching, turned and walked away. But her lips still burned, and her hands still shook, and for the first time since this all began, she didn't know who she was fighting anymore. The scream came from somewhere below, sharp, quick, and silenced too fast. Ava froze mid-sentence, the Italian word for pencil dying on her tongue. Elena's eyes widened across the table, her hand going to her throat. Then came the crash, something heavy falling, footsteps, shouting, the sound of a door being forced open, then silence, too much of it. Ava stood first. "Stay here," Elena whispered, her voice trembling. "They said the guards," but Ava was already moving. She didn't think. Training kicked in. Riccardo's drills, the pressure points, the breath control. Her body moved before the fear could catch up. Down the hallway, the sounds returned. Glass breaking, Italian curses, a man's voice, low and unfamiliar. She grabbed the letter opener from the tutor's desk, not much, but sharp enough. She flattened herself against the wall as the study door burst open. Two men, not guards, black-clad, faces masked. One held a gun, the other saw Eleanor. Everything slowed. Ava stepped out before he could reach her. "Hey!" she shouted, voice stronger than she felt. "She's not what you want." They turned. One man grabbed Elena, yanking her by the arm, pressing the barrel of the gun to her head. Ava didn't hesitate. She rushed the other, straight for the ribs, driving the letter opener deep where Riccardo had taught her. Under the arm, just beneath the chest. He screamed, dropped the gun. She didn't stop, slammed her knee into his gut. Elena scrambled away, sobbing. Ava kicked the gun across the floor, heard heard it clatter under the sofa, but the man with the weapon was already recovering. He lunged at her, tackling her to the ground. Ava hit the floor hard. The breath left her lungs in a grunt. She clawed at him, caught skin, twisted his ear, struck his throat with her elbow. Blood bloomed where she'd stabbed him. His hand went to the wound. Then, voices, real ones, familiar, the guards. Gunfire cracked. The man on top of her went limp, dead weight, blood soaked into her shirt. Hands pulled him off. She rolled over, coughing, hands shaking. And then the front doors opened with a bang. Matteo! He stormed into the room, coat still on, gun drawn. His eyes swept the scene, the bodies, the guards, Elena sobbing, and Ava on her knees, covered in blood, shaking but upright, alive. He dropped to his knees in front of her. "You're hurt," he said, voice raw. "It's not mine," she managed. She was trembling now. The adrenaline was wearing off. Her legs wouldn't work. Matteo reached for her, hesitated for the briefest second, then pulled her into his arms. She let him. For once she didn't resist. He held her tight, as if by strength alone he could pull her back from what she'd just done. "You fought," he whispered, fingers pressed against the back of her skull. "You fought." She nodded into his chest, gripping his shirt like a lifeline. "I didn't have a choice." "You did," he said, "and you chose to survive." Later, after the bodies were gone and Elena had been taken to safety, Matteo didn't leave her side. He sat on the floor with her, cradling her hand in his. "You weren't supposed to get hurt," he murmured. "I didn't," she said, "but I could have." He looked at her then, really looked, and something inside him cracked wide open. Not rage, not control, something else. "I will never let that happen again." Ava didn't answer. She didn't trust words anymore. But as he lifted her into his arms, as he carried her upstairs, and sat with her until she finally fell asleep, she believed him. It started with nausea, subtle at first, a curl of sickness in her belly that twisted with the scent of coffee or eggs. Ava brushed it off. Stress, maybe. Adrenaline fallout. After all, her body had been coiled like a wire for weeks. Fear had a taste, and it wasn't that different from morning sickness. But when the sickness lingered, sharpened, followed her from sunrise to dusk, she began to count the days. Then she stopped counting. She knew. Still, she waited 3 more mornings before saying it aloud. She waited until she could no longer lie to herself, until the truth pressed against her from the inside like a secret aching to be born. Teresa was the one who noticed. She walked in with breakfast, took one look at Ava's pale face, the untouched food, and said nothing, just returned 10 minutes later and placed a small white box on the table. "Bathroom," she said. "Second drawer." Ava didn't speak, didn't thank her, but she took the test with trembling hands. When the second line appeared, bold and unblinking, the world tilted. She stared at it for so long her legs went numb beneath her. She didn't cry, didn't scream. The silence held her like a glass cage. Later that night, Matteo returned from a meeting. Later than usual, his shoulders dusted with rain, his jaw set in that calm tension she'd come to recognize. She waited until he poured a drink. "I need to tell you something," she said. He looked up instantly. She swallowed, forcing the words through a throat gone dry. "I'm pregnant." Silence. For 1 heartbeat, 2, 3, he didn't move. The glass in his hand stopped mid-air. His gaze dropped to her stomach, still flat beneath her sweater. Then his eyes met hers again, and what she saw there made her breath hitch. It wasn't triumph, it was fear. He crossed the room in 2 strides, gently, cautiously. His hands brushed over her waist, not possessive, not claiming, just touch, trembling and reverent. "You're sure?" "Yes," he exhaled, slow, like he'd been holding his breath for years. Then he pressed his forehead to hers. "Thank you," he whispered. The days that followed changed everything. Ava didn't expect tenderness from a man like Matteo, but he moved like gravity had shifted. Suddenly, she wasn't a prisoner to be guarded. She was something fragile, vital, a vessel, yes, but also more. A woman who carried a future with his name. Doctors were summoned, private, discreet. One of them visited every other day. Ava wasn't allowed to walk down certain hallways anymore. No more sparring with Ricardo. No more wine at dinner. Her schedule was rearranged like clockwork. At first, she hated it, but then she saw him, Matteo, hovering outside the doctor's door, watching the monitors with a silent kind of awe when they found the heartbeat, his fingers twitching as if he wanted to touch the screen. He didn't speak during those appointments, just stood behind her chair, hand on her shoulder, the pressure constant and grounding. One evening, she found him on the balcony, staring out over the gardens with a glass of water instead of whiskey. "You're not drinking?" she said. "I won't take chances," he replied. "Not anymore." Something unspoken passed between them, soft and heavy. And that week something else changed. The meeting stopped, the guards shifted. The sharp voices in Matteo's office were replaced with quiet phone calls in a language Ava still couldn't entirely follow. but she didn't need to understand the words. She saw the effects. Weapons shipments halted, properties reassigned, names scrubbed from ledgers. The empire wasn't burning, but it was being trimmed, pulled back, dismantled piece by the man who built it. She confronted him one night in the study. "You're ending it," she said. "Why?" Matteo didn't look up from the papers on his desk. "Because I've taken too much from this world," he said. "Now I have something to give back." She stared at him, heart aching with something that felt dangerously like belief. "And if it's a girl?" He looked up then, smiled. Not cold, not calculated, real. "Then she will inherit more than money and power. She'll inherit safety, legacy, a name no one will dare touch." Ava stepped closer, her hand resting on the curve of her belly, still barely there. "You're building her a future," he nodded. "No," she said quietly. "You're building me one." He didn't answer, but that night, when he wrapped an arm around her waist and pulled her close in bed, not for sex, not for control, just presence, she let herself believe for the first time that the cage was opening. And maybe, just maybe, she didn't want to run. The apartment was small, Milan grey, lifeless in a way that made Ava's stomach twist. Not from the pregnancy, but from memory. She hadn't seen her father in nearly a year, not since that day he handed her over like a briefcase full of cash he couldn't repay. Now he stood across from her, older somehow, thinner. His eyes dropped to the slight curve beneath her coat, the proof of everything she'd survived, everything he'd made necessary. "You look well," he said, voice fragile, like maybe that would soften her. "I didn't come here for pleasantries." He nodded, sat. The silence filled the cracks that years of love and a single betrayal had torn open. "I was desperate," he started. "No," she cut in calmly. "You were weak, and you sacrificed me so you didn't have to face your own failure." His shoulders slumped, but he didn't deny it. That at least was something. "I didn't know what he'd do to you." Ava tilted her head. "You didn't ask." There was no point in yelling, no satisfaction in rage anymore. What she'd needed from him, apology, guilt, truth, was irrelevant now. "I'm not here to forgive you," she said, standing, "but I'll let you see your granddaughter when she's born." His eyes welled. "Ava, she'll never think she came from weakness," she said, voice low. "Only power." Back in the villa, Matteo waited on the terrace, leaning against the stone rail, watching the sea. He turned when she stepped out, expression unreadable. "Well?" he asked. She joined him, the wind lifting her hair. He cried. "And you?" She looked up at him, really looked. The man who had bought her, kept her, waited for her to become someone who could look him in the eye without flinching. The man who'd burned parts of his empire for a child he hadn't even met yet. "I didn't cry," she said. "I chose." He didn't move, but something softened in his chest. "I don't need a husband who owns me," she said. "I need a partner who doesn't flinch when I take power." "I never flinched," he said. She nodded. "That's why I'm staying." 3 months later, they married again. No chapel, no guards, no priest terrified into obedience. A cliffside ceremony in Amalfi, the waves crashing like applause beneath them. She wore a dress she chose, silk and skin, fierce and feminine. Matteo wore a simple suit, no tie, no mask. This time she walked down the aisle alone, and when she reached him, she didn't wait for vows. She just said, "Now we begin." Their daughter was born in the spring, lungs strong, eyes storm dark like her father's. They named her Isabella Teresa, a name carved from survival and memory. Ava held her against her chest and knew nothing in the world could touch them now. A year later, their son followed, Leo Matteo, all fists and fury, born with a roar. Matteo held both children like he'd never expected to earn them, and maybe he hadn't, but Ava had. She had turned the silence into strength, the cage into a crown. She stood beside him now, not because she had to, but because she'd built the throne they stood on, together.